most politicians of the age, Lloyd George never had any money of his own, and once he became coalition prime minister, he didn't have a truly national party machine to raise funds either. And so in order to keep himself in politics, he decided to sell honours, peerages, knighthoods, OBEs. Now this was hardly unknown at Westminster, but what made Lloyd George different was the blatant nature of it. He went into business big, and he went into business shamelessly. But the Prime Minister didn't want to get his own hands dirty. He needed a go-between. And he found one in a former spy, blackmailer, and rogue, complete with monocle. His name was Maundy Gregory. Maundy Gregory would entice potential clients to his opulent offices here at 38 Parliament Street. And they had a very useful back entrance. A kind of menu was quickly established. You want to be a baronet? Well, in today's money, £1.3 million. A knighthood, 330,000. Many people assumed that he was somehow a senior part of the government himself. In fact, these offices were a kind of clearinghouse for lethal gossip, bribery, and kickbacks. Victor Grayson was determined to blow the whistle on Lloyd George's cash for honours operation. Meanwhile, Special Branch had tipped Maundy Gregory off that Grayson was a dangerous communist revolutionary and asked him to keep an eye on him. When Victor Grayson realised that Gregory was spying on him, he was more than ever determined to expose him. And eventually, with enormous guts, he made a blistering speech in Liverpool in which he said, "This sale of honours is a national scandal. It can be traced all the way down from number 10 Downing Street and to a monocled dandy with offices in Whitehall. I know this man, and one day I will name him." Now events began to take on a sinister edge. In September 1920, Grayson was attacked and beaten up. 8 days later, he disappeared. That evening, Grayson was spotted by a painter called George Flemwell. Flemwell was painting a landscape close to a small island on the Thames near Hampton Court. Two men caught his attention as they passed by in a newfangled invention, an electric canoe. As it happened, Flemwell had painted Grayson's portrait and he recognized him immediately. He watched as they moored on the island and saw them go into this bungalow, Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair belonged to Maundy Gregory, the only person on the island with an electric canoe, Maundy Gregory. Grayson's friends feared that something terrible had happened. Either he'd been killed or he'd been encouraged to disappear. With Grayson out of the picture, Lloyd George's honours racket continued. One of the nominations for a peerage in his next honours list was a convicted South African fraudster called Joseph Robinson. The Commons exploded and the King was livid. Gregory had to break it to Joseph Robinson that the deal was off. But Robinson was slightly deaf. Sitting in his suite in the Savoy Hotel, he first thought he was being asked for even more money, and he pulled out his checkbook. When he finally grasped that he wasn't getting a peerage at all, he demanded his money back. The chief whip asked Gregory if he knew what had become of it. "Of course I know what's become of it," hissed Gregory. "I've spent it." One mystery still remains. There were occasional claimed sightings of Victor Grayson right up until the 1950s, in Spain, in North London, even in New Zealand. But he was never seen for certain ever again. To all intents and purposes, Victor Grayson vanished into thin air. The rather mucky Welsh wizard was still heading a Conservative-dominated coalition, but he was reaching the end of his long political road. In October 1922, the Tory backbenchers met at the Carlton Club to consider turning on their own party leadership and chucking out the Welsh cuckoo. Speaking against Lloyd George were two Conservative leaders in waiting, Andrew Bonar-Law, who was ill, and Stanley Baldwin, who did the talking. Stanley Baldwin's speech was plain but devastating. Yes, Lloyd George was a dynamic force, but, he said, a dynamic force is a terrible thing. This one had smashed Liberals and could smash the Conservatives too. They voted by 185 to 88 to cut loose and stand as an independent party. And the Conservatives have never forgotten this moment. Even to this day, their backbenchers call themselves the 1922 Committee, their badge of independence from power-drunk Westminster grandees. Britain would be spared another dynamic force for many years to come. This was an age of political pygmies. Over the next 2 years, Britain had 4 prime ministers: Bonar-Law, Stanley Baldwin, and Britain's first Labour Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald. He only lasted 10 months. Oh yes, and then Stanley Baldwin again. But there was one big beast prowling around. After 20 years with the Liberals, Winston Churchill returned to Parliament as the Conservative MP for Epping. He was hoping Baldwin would offer him a modest government job. In fact, the Prime Minister asked him to be Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Churchill was dumbfounded. I should like to have answered, "Will the bloody duck swim?" But he had a sense of occasion and in fact said to Baldwin, "I shall be delighted to serve you in this splendid office." But Churchill was not a splendid Chancellor. He had one great decision in front of him, and he got it wrong. In March 1925, he summoned 4 economists to dine at the Treasury to thrash out the burning economic issue of the day, the gold standard. The gold standard simply meant fixing the price of national currencies to a certain amount of gold, providing a clear, transparent system which had underpinned the huge boom in world trade in the golden years before the war. Globalization with Britain at the centre. But during the war, the British economy had been bled dry, and the City of London had lost its prime position to New York. The radical young economist John Maynard Keynes thought that going back to gold would devastate Britain's already weakened industry.